Alright guys, so this video is going to be on installing and configuring Puppet's R10K, which is their code manager product, on a Puppet open source server. So when you use Puppet Enterprise, you just naturally get R10K, I believe, installed, but with the open source, it's not as easy to just use it. So that's what this tutorial or this video is going to be about. It's going to be about installing, configuring R10K to be able to pull down the control repo from Git. Not GitHub. In this instance, it's going to be your own GitLab server. So I have two previous videos that I made that you're going to have to run through first to be able to run through this, or if you're just doing it to your own Puppet environment, make sure you snapshot prior to doing anything, because you don't want to mess anything up, and you're going to be making quite a bit of changes on your Puppet master. So the first thing is puppetserver is already installed, and then also we already have GitLab installed. And part of that GitLab installation, in my video, I explained how to generate or create, actually it's not generate, it is cloning the default control repo from Puppet's repository, and then adding and then pushing that to your control repo on your own GitLab server. So it starts with having all of that already built. The next thing we're going to do is install R10K to be able to manage that code environment, or environments rather, in your Puppet server. So let's get started. So the first thing you're going to want to do is get R10K installed. Also, this is, I guess I should also say that this is an Ubuntu 18.04 Linux distro that has, or installation that has nothing installed on it yet. In fact, we can say, oops. Dude, really? Okay, so I wanted to say history here. So you can see these are literally the commands I've done so far since I installed it. This particular Puppet master has not a whole lot done. Let's go ahead and switch to sudo-s, and let's do a history there. It's a little bit longer, I suppose. Actually, it looks like it's the same thing, right? So basically, the only thing we've done is installed puppetserver. So puppetserver is currently running on this box, and but that's it. So what we're going to do is configure and install R10K. So because it's been a little while since I installed this, let's start with an apt update. And there's probably going to be some stuff it needs to install. It's been a little while. Yeah, look at that. 28 items need to be upgraded. So I don't think this will take very long. I can pause it, or we can just let it go. I'm going to pause it. Be right back. All right, so I've installed the latest updates or patches. I upgraded, apt upgrade, and that's completed. So it actually took a little bit of time, honestly. So let's get started on installing R10K. And so I'm going to use, so obviously, in case you didn't notice earlier, I switched to sudo-s. So I'm acting as root now. I'm going to install R10K using the gem tool or application. And it should go ahead and be successful in this installation. It runs through quite a few things to get it installed. I'm hoping it doesn't run into any problems. There you go. So it says it's done. So it installs R10K into the Puppet server location. And so actually we can test that by looking at right here. It's under options, optional rather, R10K. So I'm going to go ahead and just validate that. And actually I'm going to put that up here too. So here we can just run this. And then we can see that indeed R10K is installed. So there you go. So R10K is killer robot powered by Puppet environment deployment. So so now we have R10K installed. It's literally that easy to get it installed. The next complicated part is getting it configured so that it works correctly, and that it can pull the necessary control repo files from your GitLabs repo. So what we want to do is create a directory under puppetlabs puppetserver ssh, and this is where we're going to keep the keys for connecting to the repository. The next thing you want to do is create some keys. We're going to do a ssh-keygen, and we're going to create the control repo private and public keys that we're going to use for communicating with Git. And that's done. And then, so I can show you what that looks like really quick. The keys get put under etc. puppetlabs puppetserver ssh, and actually let me do ll, and you can see they're right there. So we're going to change some stuff. First, it can't be root, it has to be puppet, and the permissions for the private key are actually decent, so we could leave those alone, but we're still going to change some stuff. So we're going to change the ownership here of everything in this folder to Puppet instead of root, and I can show you that change now. And then we're also going to change the ownership of the entire Puppet server to Puppet as well. So if you look at puppetlabs Puppet server here, you can see everything's owned by root, and I think it needs to be owned by Puppet because Puppet is the account that the service or the daemon runs under. So we're going to go ahead and set that. And the -r here under chown means recursive, so everything under Puppet server is now owned by Puppet, which is what we want. The next thing we want to do is, and actually it doesn't look like I have to do that, but just in case the permissions are wrong, 755 on SSH, that's already done. And then the next thing I want to do is I want to change the permissions on the private key to 600, which this one's already 600, and the public keys, I mean, you could actually leave the public key alone. So technically you don't have to run this. We're actually not going to. But just in case these get changed, it's very important that your private key for SSH to use it, which is what get's going to be using to communicate with your get repository, it has to be 600. It has to be the right permissions, otherwise it's going to reject that private key. Like if this was a 777, SSH would not use that key, it would just deny it. And the funny part about that is it doesn't really say, hey, your permissions are wrong. It just says, I can't use that key or something stupid like that. So the next thing I want to do is I'm going to create a configuration folder under Puppet Labs called R10K. And the reason I want this is because that's where we're going to put the R10K configuration file. So R10K expects configuration files in one of two locations. One of them is deprecated, which means no longer used. And like the original one was just under etc. You put r10k.yaml, but they don't want that anymore. So now they want that R10K YAML under etc. Puppet Labs R10K. So we're just going to drop it there from the get-go. So I'm going to go ahead and say vi, which is an editor. Oh, I got the wrong code here. That's too funny. So this is actually Puppet Labs R10K YAML. So here, I'll copy that. And we'll paste and edit. This is a new file. What you want to do is configure your environment, your Git environment in here for R10K to understand where to get your control repo. So the cache-dir is where it's going to cache your Git commands, and then when it deploys, when R10K deploys what it fetches from your Git repository, it's gonna put those files underneath the base dir here. So that's important. Etc. Puppet Labs code environments, and this is my remote repo. And you get this repo from your GitLab server, so I can show you that really quick. If you go to your GitLab, this is my GitLab, and if I go to clone with SSH, that's what I want. So copy that, and then go back to here, and that's literally the same thing, and I'll show you that. I'll just paste it in there real quick and not edit, or save it rather. So there you can see that's the same command here, or the same URL. Bam. So I'm gonna get rid of that. All right. So basically, that's what your R10K YAML should look like. It's basically specifying the cache location for the repository, and then where it's going to put its specific environment code. We're going to put it under code environments because that's the default for Puppet Master. And that's it. I'm not going to define a Puppet. Excuse me. I'm not going to define a private key here. We're not using the rugged, what's it called? The rugged SSH method, I guess is what it is. We're going to use git shell instead. And I'll show you how to configure git shell to use the private key instead of define the private key in here for rugged. I'm not using rugged because I couldn't figure out how to get rugged installed on here. For a Puppet Enterprise, rugged's just already there, so I didn't have to install it. So instead of fighting with rugged, I just decided to use the git shell instead. And so that's basically it. It's a very simple configuration file. We're going to go ahead and save it. And then what we need to do, though, is we want to put in the SS. So up here we created the key, right, the private key. And this is the key that your Git command is going to connect to your Git repository with. So it uses this private key to do what's called their key deploy keys. Gosh, I'm stumbling all over. Deploy keys. And so Let's go ahead and get that private key and put it into our Git server. So, and I'll show you how to do that. So basically, it's just going to be a cat, so I can see the so I can see the contents of this private key. Copy that bad boy there, and so here's my private key. I'm going to block and copy that, and we're going to go ahead and go into my repository here, and it's under settings, CI/CD for your control repo. And it's deploy keys. So I'm going to go ahead and expand deploy keys. And you can see I've already got a key in here for when I deployed this particular Git instance to work with Puppet Enterprise, but today we're using it for just Puppet's open source. So you paste the key in there. Sorry, this is not the right key. This is my private key. What the heck am I doing? Don't be stupid like that. You don't put your private key in there. You put your public key in there. And don't freak out, because this is just a lab environment, so these keys really don't mean anything. Okay, so your public key, I'm sorry guys, your public key goes under deploy keys, not your private key. So I'm going to go ahead and take that, put it in the title, and I'm going to go ahead and add this key as a deploy key. So now you can see I've got my deploy key here for Puppet Master. So now my Puppet instance, or my Git instance rather, is if it uses that private key associated with this public key, it can create a communication channel between, authenticate and encrypt between itself and the GitLab server. So, so that's all we have to do in the GitLab server for now. The next thing I want to do is change the ownership of that puppetlabs code folder, because it needs to be owned by Puppet, not, oh my gosh, I keep doing that, not root. And so if I do an ls la on etc puppetlabs, you can see code is currently owned by root, and if we go into code, it's all owned by root, which means if you were to run the R10K, it would not have permissions to be writing into this, because it's read for everyone and not write. So what we're going to do is change the ownership to Puppet. -R means recursive, so now if I do an LSLA, you can see that it's all owned by Puppet now instead, right? Perfect. The next thing I want to do is create that cache folder that wasn't there prior. So if I did an ls var cache, there would have been no R10K in there, just some other stuff. And then the other thing I want to do is change the ownership of that cache folder to Puppet, so the Puppet has access to be writing files into the cache. And now you can see R10K is owned by Puppet, which is great. The next thing we want to do is create a an SSH shell configuration file for the Puppet user. So if you do it a cat etc passwords, you can see that my Puppet user here, Puppet, its home folder is actually not under home like most user accounts, standard user accounts are. Its home folder sits under that location there, optional or option, whatever that stands for, Puppet Labs server data Puppet server. So what we want to do is we want to create an SSH folder in that Puppet home folder, because there isn't one there yet, and then I want to edit a configuration file within that .ssh folder. This configuration file here is going to be what Git and SSH would use for using a private key to make the authentication. So basically what we're saying here is stopitsomemore.com, and actually this needs to be git.stopitsomemore.com, same with that one. Let me change my code here. So basically if you connect to this host name, it'll use this private key as the identify file. This is essentially the same as like typing ssh-i and then saying, hey, use this private key to make the connection. We're defining that in a .ssh file. So we're basically saying, if you connect to git.stopitsomemore.com, I want you to use this private key to make that connection. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. And I want to show you some stuff real quick before we make more configurations. So first, let's look at this folder. You can see .ssh is currently owned by root. We don't want that. So the first thing we're going to do is right here. Actually, this should be the first thing. I don't know why I'm doing it last here. I'm going to move that around. We're going to change the ownership on this folder to Puppet. So now let's look at that again. Now everything's owned by a Puppet instead of a couple that were owned by root. So now the SSH folder is owned by Puppet. The next thing you want to do is change that to permission, change the permissions that SSH to only Puppet user has access to it. And you can see that change now. Got here, it's 700 instead. And then I also want to change the permissions on the configuration file to only read. 6 is 4 plus 2. So that would be read write 600. So read write is the only thing that can be done on the config here. And I guess I could just show you that really quick here. So ls.ssh, and you see config is now permissions are 600. And then the next thing I want to do is I want to generate a key, a known hosts file under root when I connect to git.stopsomemore.com. So this would obviously be your Git server. But I'm going to go ahead and say yes, and it's going to add that. And now I've got, and I'm going to cancel. I don't care to authenticate. All I wanted to do was generate a known host file underneath of root.ssh. And so you can see I've got known hosts right here, right? And that known host file now contains the information so that it doesn't have to ask you sure you want to continue connecting, because we've trusted that ECDSA key fingerprint, and it was added to known hosts. And so what we want to do then is that we're going to copy this known host file from root.ssh known host to our puppet user home folder.ssh. So that command right there. And if we did it, let's tab up here, and I want a ls.ssh folder. Now you can see the known host is there, right? And now I know why I did this command afterwards. Let's go ahead and put it down here, because now I have to run it again. Because I need to make sure that that known host is not root like it shows. It needs to be puppet like that. Perfect. So now we've got a known host file that we trust the connection to get. And the next thing we want to do is, so one other thing I wanted to mention is that this video kind of a precursor for getting a GitLab runner to be able to execute and run R10K as part of a pipeline in your GitLab. So we're going to build some of that configuration right now. So that's why the next step we're going to do is we're going to create an account called GitLab runner. And essentially we're going to do a user add, create the home folder, define the shell as bin bash, create a user group to match the username, and then set a wild password. In this case, I just literally hammered on the keyboard. It really doesn't matter what it is, because you're not going to use it. You're going to make the authentication between the GitLab runner and this Puppet master using mutual keys. So authorized host file is what you'll be using there, but that'll be a different video. So let's go ahead and add that user. Now if we said cat, etc. password, you can see GitLab runner is right here. So I've got a GitLab runner user now, and if you also said ls home, we'll have a GitLab runner folder, which is excellent. That's exactly what we wanted, right? So I got GitLab runner now. So the reason I wanted to create that is because we're going to create a shell file called puppet deploy, and this is what the pipeline will use via GitLab runner to execute the R10K command for deploying your code from Git. And so let's go ahead and edit that file. This file is going to, let me paste this in here. I don't remember all of these because I actually wrote this a little while ago. But basically what it's doing is it's running sudo as user puppet, and then run this bash command, R10K, which is under the puppet folder, deploy environment, $1, which means I'm going to pass it a variable, a command line argument, and I want to make sure it's verbose, so show me all the output. And I also want you, as R10K, to look at the puppet file and download and install any mods I've defined in that puppet file inside of my control repo. So let's go ahead and right quit that. We need to make it executable, so let's go ahead. Oh, we also need to change the ownership of that. So now if we did an ls-ll home GitLab runner, you can see puppet deploy right there is owned by GitLab runner. Perfect. Now we want to add execute capabilities to that. Oops, ran it twice. Now you can see puppet deploy shell has execute capability. And so basically, assuming everything works, that's literally it. So the next thing we want to do, though, is run this puppet deploy and specify a particular environment. I'm going to go ahead and say puppet deploy environment production, because that's the primary one that I'd like to deploy. And so let's go ahead and do that. So it's going to be puppet. Oh, sorry, guys. I want to go to home GitLab runner, and I want to say puppet deploy production. And assuming it works right, it should literally take and pull the git production configuration, all the files in that environment. So it's going to be like the Puppet files. It's going to run through, install the mods. So I've got 2 mods defined in my Puppet file, and I can show you that in a second. And then I have some manifest files and a variety of other things that would have gotten deployed as part of this deploy here. So let's go ahead and look at that. So I'm going to say ls, etc., puppetlabs code. I like LL because it shows permission. So there's your environment. So let's go ahead and look at environments. And there's production, right? Production was already there. So let's go ahead and look at that. Ooh. So before I ran this, the production folder did not have this many files in it at all. So this is really good. So it pulled down the necessary files. And we now have the production environment deployed on our Puppet master using R10K from our Git control-repo repository. And that's really exciting, actually. ls, let's go ahead and change to that directory. And I want to do cat puppet file, and you can see I've added puppet file here, 2 mods, right? I've added Cisco IOS for managing Cisco devices and device manager for managing the puppet proxy. This is a whole different topic. We'll have to do that in a different video. But that's essentially for managing Cisco equipment using Puppet. And so that's going to be it for this video. I don't have anything else to add except for now your R10K is capable. Your next step would be to get that GitLab runner to run this deploy Puppet shell script for you, and that's a different video. So let's go ahead and get making that video. I have a couple more items I have to configure and get running for you, and I should have that uploaded in the next week or so, I'm hoping. So hope you guys enjoyed. Thanks for watching.